Hey, meaningful movers. Welcome back to Moving with Meaning, the podcast, where actions have meaning, words have meaning, and we open up the conversations to discover what's your next move. I'm your host, Krystal. In today's episode, we are going to pull back the curtains on the raw diet culture and fitness training. We're going to be careful not to overdo it, though. But you know how it is and what we do. We need to set that theme, so let's go ahead and do that. The word of the day is stamina. This is the capacity to sustain long periods of mental and physical output. It's no secret that fitness is trending, looking for the perfect physique or maybe just healthy food choices and portioning. I think we know that the body and mind are more complicated than that. It takes a combined effort and discipline to get these two nutritional moguls to make the perfect power couple. That's enough of me talking. How about we introduce our guest? And there's no one better to do that than herself, Allison. Why don't you give the people a bit of background about yourself and what you're going to share with us today?
Hey, Krystal. Yeah, excited to have this conversation. I'm Allison. I started Ally. We work with people who are struggling with Red S, which is primarily what we're going to be talking about today, what that is, how you can spot it, what you should do if you have it. But it's a condition that's actually quite common in folks, especially who are disciplined, especially who are active. And it's pretty easy to go down this path when you're really interested in your health. And it's something I wish I had known earlier. I struggled with this issue for several years before I was seeking help. And that's really what inspired me to start Ally and help others do the same.
Oh, I'm super stoked, to have this conversation today because I'm a fitness buff. I did the CrossFit thing, and it was just, from childhood. I was just a very athletic and active child, and I think I got really comfortable with the way that my body looked, and then, just doing things. Then I got into dieting while you're doing that, and that is just a big red flag because I had just a major issue with that, but we're going to get into that in a minute. So you grew up also very active. What you did was so active.
Yeah, so I come from a really active household. I always like to joke that I'm by far the least athletic person in my family, yet I was a cheerleader actually growing up. I did dance. I also did a little bit of running, but primarily was doing cheer. I did that throughout high school. I ended up doing it through college. Then when I graduated, I got really into running. And I think I saw that coming because I was always dabbling in if I should do track or if I should do cross country in my younger years. But once I graduated, it was kind of that transition moment where I had gone from a really regimented training program where it was year round and we had a ton of commitments and it was very structured to wanting to figure out what fitness was going to look like for me after I graduated. And as somebody that was valuing health and fitness, I was eager to find something that would be matching a lot of the objectives there. And I also tend to be someone that can be somewhat competitive, mostly with myself. And so running was kind of that perfect outlet where I ended up training more and more. And it went from 5Ks to half marathons to marathons. And I loved it, but it was also very similar to what you were alluding to, a period of time where because I was so interested in my health, I got very interested in nutrition. I was following a lot of various diet culture related trends. And that is part of what I realized was problematic with my health at that time.
Mm-hmm. Look, don't you shy away with cheerleading, not being athletic. Girl, y'all got some muscles, okay? And the thighs, because my daughter's a cheerleader and she could probably push up some people. Like she's really, it's intense and they take it so serious. I didn't realize how serious it was until she got into it and just, I don't know. But yeah, y'all are very, very into that. No, by no means. I was like, that is a sport. Y'all need to go ahead and put it in the Olympics and all that good stuff.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah,
absolutely.
It's definitely entertaining to watch. And it's actually, that comment that I make is more so about how truly athletic my family is. The rigor that they are participating in various athletic endeavors is really impressive. But yeah, cheerleading is an underrated athletic endeavor. And it's definitely something that we for sure took seriously at the time because of how injury prone it is. And there are various surfaces that you're having to perform on. And that's a whole different rabbit hole of a conversation. But you're right. It is something that was very rigorous and required a lot of time and attention for sure.
Sure. So obviously we always get signs that something ain't right. And, obviously we're not thinking it's overdoing it. It's got to be something else. So my sign was, and I'm going to just throw little points in here as you go along with your story. So my sign was I was getting headaches, like migraines, like serious hard headaches, and I couldn't understand that. I was like, I just finished working out. I'm eating. What is the problem that made me kind of go, let me get checked? What was yours?
For me, it was that my period went missing. And there were probably signs that I experienced before that, but because I was so used to just pushing through anything that I was capable of enduring, I wasn't really privy to pay attention to any other signs that weren't pretty obvious that I could not really ignore. So for me, the first one that I felt like I couldn't ignore was my missing period.
I heard that happens to a lot of marathon runners who I heard that happens to a lot of people who do that regimented dieting. Like, it is a very rigorous, like, it's super rigorous. I'm amazed. What happened? Just tell me what happened with the whole period missing thing going on.
Yeah, and you're right. It is something that's super common, especially among runners or any sort of endurance athlete. And essentially, the more endurance athletic that you're doing, or what's interesting is that it happens a lot in folks where they're participating in a sport that has a lot of body standards. And so then now we're thinking about ballet, we're thinking about dance, and then maybe swimming, cycling, running. But it can really happen, to your point, in anyone, even if they're not identifying as an athlete, but they are following rigid or strict dieting patterns. So I ended up missing my period. And first I went to the doctor and disclosed this information because I thought that something was off. Like, prior to this, I didn't really have major issues, and was told that because I was running, it was actually something that was expected. Yeah, that face that you just made is exactly the reaction I now have to the fact that that was something that I experienced. But it was one of the situations where for several years, I actually didn't think there was an issue because I wasn't trying to get pregnant at the time. And so I thought, oh, well, it's, if the only reason to have it is for fertility, then if anything, it's kind of convenient because the doctor is telling me it's normal when I don't run. And if anything, it was more of an inconvenience. I wish that I had known sooner that it isn't just about fertility and that it wasn't something that was normal, even though it's something that's happening frequently in folks that are running at any level, but especially at more of like a marathon training load, does not mean that it's normal. And it's something that I wish I had prioritized sooner, and I wish I had gotten support sooner. But essentially, it took several years for me to even realize and speak to a clinician who treated it with a sense of urgency and essentially helped me realize that there was something I should take action on sooner. But there were many, many experiences I had where I really questioned if it was an issue, and if it was an issue, whether or not it was something I even needed to prioritize. And if I needed to prioritize it, like why I needed to prioritize it. I was very skeptical for a really long time because I had been so rigid and regimented about my health and so used to the narrative from all different avenues that what I was doing was really disciplined, super healthy, really enviable. It was really easy for me to just say, oh, well, if it's normal and they're saying it's normal and I'm otherwise being told I'm the pinnacle of health, then it must not be an issue.
Getting all the accolades, the glory. Like, you're right, I'm the pinnacle, I'm the poster girl of what you should be doing. So everything must be right. Oh my gosh. Man, you don't think about that when you're going through stuff, that you kind of start to ignore things that happen, that should happen naturally, and you ignore them when they don't, and you don't even recognize them as unnatural. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So it wasn't enough for you to just get yourself right. This took a whole life of its own and created a whole passion for you. What is that?
Yeah, it was one of those things where my experience was so frustrating, especially in retrospect. And when I realized the prevalence of this issue and the fact that the idea that other people could be suffering in silence or being told that it's normal when there are real health consequences was so unpalatable for me. So I really wanted to be able to create a program that would help other people in a way that short-circuited so much of the roundabout confusion and unnecessary delays in care that I went through. And I will say, especially during the time when I was struggling with this, it was considered a slightly more niche issue. And so I can understand why there might have been misinformation and confusion about how to navigate the healthcare system and exactly what treatment should look like or what changes need to be made. But increasingly, there's been a lot of research coming out about what this issue is and what the other health consequences could look like, such that it really pains me when I see other people that come to work with Ally that are having similar experiences where it's baffling to them that they can't get support and they don't even know whether or not they for sure can get a diagnosis or what they should be doing or whether or not it's an issue. And yet they're experiencing real challenges and real symptoms, like you were mentioning, like with your headaches, that are signaling that something isn't right. And at the same time, it's usually this very similar prototype, right? They've gone down this path of really trying to optimize their nutrition. They're reading all of the random advice from probably gathering it anywhere from like diet trends to like TikTok to credible sources that may not just be catering towards their demographic and conflating either like weight loss advice with just general nutritional advice or so many different avenues. And there's so much noise out there right now that it can be very, very hard to navigate. But all in all, it's coming to the point where their intention is health and fitness and to try to be really rigorous in how they're pursuing that. And then only to realize that at some point something feels off. So that's really what kind of took a life of its own in terms of me feeling really passionate about this specific issue and this specific population and wanting to provide support and resources for what I went through that was a much like lonelier, confusing, and roundabout experience that didn't really need to be.
Absolutely. And it's good you picked it up. Somebody got to do it. I mean, let's get real about it. And I like the word that you used was demographic. That is so important because just the way how they metabolize different supplements or vitamins or fats and sugars and things like that. I mean, the way that these diets are put out, it's like it fits everybody. It's a one size fits all kind of thing. Do this and you get these results. Like I've done paleo, I've done keto. Yeah. I've done a lot of them as I was going through them. Like paleo, I can't do it. That's what got me the headaches because it literally removed almost all fat from the diet. And that's what I got the headaches from because I had the fat and the carbs, that's the energy. So if you have no energy fuel in your body and you're going doing these CrossFit, like CrossFit is hard, okay? And I go and do that. Yeah, your body, it's almost like your body's eating itself because it has to find something to keep going on. So it's going to eat away at the muscle that you just try to build or whatever. My husband, he was doing keto and then I researched it and I was like, babe, you got to stop because keto, right? It amps up your fat intake, but you have heart issues in your family. Like that runs in your family. So your heart can't take that kind of diet, right? And he was just looking at the results, seeing him slim down. I'm like, well, check your cholesterol, check all that stuff that affects your heart. Because if them things ain't down, this ain't working. So yeah, you have to be really intentional. I think that's a good word here, which is going to lead into intentional dieting, which I've never heard. But we're going to get into that. Tell me about all the challenges that comes with training your body with health in mind.
Yeah. And so I think that it's such a good point that you're bringing up about how a lot of these diets or even just dieting trends, even if you're not following a strict diet, will encourage some form of elimination, some form of restricting something and saying there's all these reasons why it's terrible and really awful and bad. And I think that one of the challenges that we can fall into is when we get to that relationship with food where we're demonizing certain things or we feel like guilty when we're eating certain things, it can come to a place where food becomes pretty stressful. And whether that's like trying to navigate social situations and flexibility while trying to perfectly count your macros or optimize exactly what foods you cannot have, it can become really hard to feel a sense of freedom and flexibility. And then also to realize that food is probably taking up an increasingly larger amount of mind space, which was definitely something that I noticed as one of the red flags that I had been ignoring for a long time was just how much headspace and preoccupation with food, whether that was because I was trying to think through and plan things out in the day or just a natural response to restricting food in general, but especially certain food groups is intentional, intense, or much higher acuity like cravings. And then that can cause like obviously a higher fixation on food. And so one of the things to keep in mind is that when we're training at a really high level, sometimes when we're conflating some of these dieting advice with how we're applying that to ourselves, it can be harmful. And one example of that specifically is, especially for folks, and I think I love that you brought up CrossFit, because CrossFit is also like a very prominent prototype for struggling with something like this because of how high intensity it is.
Mm-hmm.
A couple mistakes that I see that are really common, because of course, like it is very individualized, what's going to work for you and also potentially what mistakes you might be more prone to be making. But two really common ones I see. One is not valuing and allowing yourself appropriate recovery and rest. So viewing rest as lazy, or you feeling guilty on rest days, or feeling like you need to compensate for some way on rest days. And as somebody who does identify as I enjoy being productive, I feel like I have frequently noticed that I tend to be like kind of a high achiever. This is something I definitely struggled with, which was feeling like there could be a sense of letting go and accepting that rest was actually part of training. It was beneficial for my training. It was necessary for my training. Getting off the hamster wheel of feeling like if I didn't go harder, or if I didn't meet the same standards that I'd set for myself the prior day, the prior week, the prior month, and would get that kind of competitiveness with myself, that I would find myself feeling like I was self-critical about how I had done, or about whether or not I was losing my performance, or just coming down on myself about having worked out, let alone taking a full time for rest. And so I think that that's one thing that I see people sometimes messing up in a similar way. The other one is how important, to your point on energy, how important energy is. And when we think about that, the importance of eating, well, all of the macros, but especially eating carbs. I think that carbs can get such a bad reputation within folks that are trying to be really healthy. And yet the amount of carbs that, especially coming from somebody who has experienced like high intensity exercise, the amount of carbs that we need is usually vastly underestimated. And especially if that's something that we're being more restrictive around for whatever reason, because we view some of them as bad, or because we view some of them as too unhealthy, then it can reinforce this pattern where we're under eating carbs. And that can also be really detrimental, especially if you're experiencing something like I was, which was these red flags around experiencing REDs. They've actually had studies shown that really commonly it's a situation where people are under eating carbs. Specifically carbs.
Yeah.
So I think that it's something that was a huge eye-opener for me, because I never really thought about carbs in that way.
Yeah.
It was something that I think I often seeing people underestimating the importance of carbs and the value of carbs, and feeling like, if anything else, they've been told from whatever different sources that it's like bad and it's something that they should avoid. So that's the second mistake that I see people making often when they're training at higher levels.
Oh, man. You just taken us right into the next question I was going to ask. But I just have to say, you're right. The whole narrative around carbs is it's horrible. It's really bad. I like how you had to say, one of the things that you were talking about was just introspecting, just from a place of, I need to reframe my thinking to not identify with fitness, identify with athletic, identify with body image and things like that. But, I want to be healthy. That is the vision. That is the North Star. And whatever it takes to get that in the right capacity and the right balance, then that's good to pursue. So you mentioned Red S. What is that? And what are the indicators that come with that?
Yes. So I love this question. Red S is relative energy deficiency in sport, which is really a mouthful way of saying that your body is in a state where it isn't getting enough energy to support its needs and at its activity level. And that could be anything from exercise to just metabolism, temperature, right? Like the things that are needed to keep the lights on. And essentially what happens is that when we're in a chronic energy deficit, which means that we're not meeting those energy needs, then our body's going to redirect energy from secondary functions, which I'm going to put in air quotes, because that's things like reproductive health, like getting your period. And that's the same in men as well, as actually reproductive health is one. And immune function, like things that we still really like to have. but into
Yeah.
very core, necessary, going back to almost like a survival mode type of bodily functions that are necessary. Being in this state for a long period of time can cause issues. And that's why they coined this term REDS, which was actually formerly known as female athlete triad, if anyone happens to know that term. It's the same thing, but essentially this can lead to not only like reproductive yellow or red flags, like not getting your period, but it can also influence things like your bone health, where you can become more at risk for like early onset osteoporosis or osteopenia, like weakened bone density, essentially, which can increase your risk of stress fractures. It can cause issues with muscle, which essentially can impact your ability not only to like perform and recover and repair, but even things like digestion. So you might be experiencing some digestive issues like bloating or constipation, or any sort of like digestive discomfort could even be impacted because there's all those muscles in your digestive tract. There's also, of course, like the immune functioning. So getting sick really frequently, getting injured really frequently. There can even be in like worse situations like cardiovascular issues. So that was all information that when I was thinking about this from the binary perspective of like, does it matter whether or not I have my period, yes or no? Things that I wish that I had known were actually, because this was just a symptom of this underlying issue, there were other things that were at risk because I was experiencing REDS. And so that's what I was mentioning in terms of encouraging, if this is something you think you're struggling with, prioritizing addressing it sooner than later, because it isn't just an issue of, do I need to be fertile in this exact moment? As much as this is like an indicator of other things that could be going wrong. So some signs that you can look out for if you think that this is something you're experiencing. We mentioned a few. So any sort of menstrual disturbances, it doesn't necessarily have to be a missing period. Sometimes there might be irregularities or prolonged periods, or maybe you're having fewer periods. There are also a lot of people that are on birth control, which makes it a lot harder to know whether or not this is something you're experiencing. So other things could be feeling cold really easily or really frequently. It could be feeling digestive issues. Frequent urination is actually sort of an interesting one. That is a sign. Preoccupation with food. You know, the interesting one, though, that I always like to bring it back to is the behaviors are often more easy to identify than some of the symptoms, just because this tends to happen in folks that are really disciplined. And so some of these more subtle signs and symptoms tend to be really easy to ignore. But behaviors would include things like feeling a certain level of guilt around food or certain food groups, feeling like you tend to avoid certain food or food groups or food types because, you know, in the interest of health, feeling really guilty or stressed if you are taking a rest day or maybe not working out as hard as you normally do. And some of those behaviors can actually be clearer signs or indications in combination with some of these other what seemingly unexplained health issues could be indicating that something is off. And so I usually like to mention some of those because sometimes those are more easy to identify in yourself when you're so used to ignoring some of the things that you've just been used to like pushing through. Another one that is interesting is stress. Folks that are feeling really burnt out, they're stagnating in their performance. They feel like they're getting injured really frequently. Like they feel like they're almost like having to force themselves to work out. Are interesting ones as well. Yeah. And I think that's an interesting one because a lot of people don't always affiliate, because they're so optimized in their health, how this could even be influencing their performance. So of course, like low energy, feeling tired, dizzy, like feeling weak, those are all symptoms as well that you could be experiencing. Yeah, I think that if any of these could potentially resonate, then it could be worthwhile to evaluate some of these more behavioral related things to see whether this could be relevant to REDS as something that could be causing some of these unexplained issues.
Man, that's a lot to take in there because, well, I just said it. I mean, the mind and the body just work hand in hand. The symptoms can just be related to, sometimes it could just really be your diet. Am I really unhappy with my job? Or is it I'm stressed and anxious because I'm about to go and do this workout that I don't want to do, but I know I got to do it to keep up, kind of thing. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it's super interesting as well because they've actually shown that one predisposition that increases your likelihood that you would be experiencing something like this, which essentially, like, I usually like to use the term overtraining and underfueling because, well, REDS is, as we mentioned, like a little bit of a mouthful, but also because essentially that's what is happening. it's some combination of overtraining and or underfueling. I think it's interesting because they've shown that people who are perfectionists, which essentially means like you have high standards for yourself, and that means that you probably are more disciplined, or you are more competitive, or you do tend to live in a state where there is higher level of stress because you are setting these high standards for yourself, makes you more predisposed to have this issue. And I think that that's super interesting because a lot of the times what people don't realize is that a lot of the folks that are coming and working with me or coming into these programs, they're not realizing that when we're talking about demographics, and when we're talking about who we're really serving in this type of population that's experiencing this type of issue, it tends to be people that are super competent. I think that it's interesting because sometimes that same population group can be the most hesitant or resistant to seek help or admit that there could be an issue because they have this like core belief, like I just have high expectations for myself. I'm different. My standards are higher than what I would expect other people to be able to do. And it doesn't come from a place of arrogance. It's coming from this place of like almost being
the identification of my success.
Yeah, identification. Exactly. That was something that for a long time, I was unsure if I could be experiencing an issue like this because I was like, no, I don't really identify as that. Like, I don't think that I would have problems in that area. And that in combination with this external validation that we were mentioning is like a huge component that can often happen with this cohort of people as well, can make it really hard to realize the same behaviors that we've been doing for so long in order to be the quote unquote pinnacle of health are the same ones that are actually now potentially putting our health at risk. That is a really dissonant place to be. And that's an area that kept me stuck for a really long time, to the point that you were just making about like, wow, that was a lot of things to kind of unpack about the issues that could be arising because of RED-S or REDS. I vastly underestimated how many issues that I was experiencing ended up getting resolved when I started fixing this issue. Things that I would never have expected when I first was going out like, hey, I just want to get my period back. But then to realize like, oh, wow, I was actually underperforming in my training. I was not focusing as well as I could have been at work. I was experiencing coldness where I didn't really need to be. I was maintaining really high levels of stress that I'm not saying that I don't stress now, but I am saying that there were areas where it was much more self-induced. And I also was experiencing this feeling of being fairly stuck around how I was navigating exercise and nutrition, that I didn't know if it could have been any different. But coming on the other side of it, realizing that it was possible for me to not relate to it in that way was one of the biggest things that I had gained. So it's one of those things that like, I don't know if, even if I told myself all of this when I was in the heat of it, if I would have believed any of that. So it's hard to say whether or not if this is something that might be resonating with you, if that is something that you believe in for yourself or can resonate with. But even just going after it because you think that you're experiencing some of these symptoms and you're maybe potentially worried about either your performance or your health outcomes or your bone health, or you don't want to get a stress fracture, whatever it is that really lights that fire, it's 100% worthwhile to at least explore it because of how much you potentially stand to gain back by going through the recovery process.
Absolutely. And you know what? I was going to say, hey, what are some sample diets? But I think if y'all want to know, y'all need to reach out to Allison yourself. What do you think, Allison?
I would absolutely love to have that conversation with anyone individually. So yes, don't hesitate to reach out. Feel free to message me or set up a time to chat live. I love speaking to people about it.
Fantastic. Well, you dropped so many on us already, but do you have any golden nuggets that you want to just catch up to recap?
Yes. Okay. So I think that in the name of perfectionism, I usually like to say that one thing that's resonated with me is that when I feel like I'm really doubting myself and I feel like I'm not good enough, one of the things that I really challenge myself to do is to question the standards that I'm setting for myself instead of questioning myself as a human. It's really hard and it's something I have to remember to do, but that's one thing as a perfectionist that I've continually tried to learn. The other thing that I will just say in the name of, us talking about dieting and demographics is I love the quote that I recently read in a book that I've been loving, is that women are not just small men. And so when we think about how we're navigating our health, when we're thinking about the decisions we're making with nutrition or with our exercise, there are some things that are worth being aware of that as a woman, it might be different than the advice that may be working or really praised or really recommended for men, because We're different biologically in several ways. There are some areas where I do think that women's health is something that we should take stock of. And I'm personally really passionate about women's health. So I usually like to remind folks that women are not just small men.
Oh, good. Look at that. Rest, recover, repair. I like it. That's the episode today. What a workout. Those were some heavy-hitting insights. I hope you were bobbing and weaving just like I was, because you got to be in the game to get the results and not just a bystander. It's too easy to focus on one aspect of health and nutrition simply because one is just more fun and exciting than the other. I'll tell you what, when you feel like you are juggling a bunch of groceries because you went into the market just to grab a few items and ended up with an armful of, well, let's just say supplements, reach out to Allison to slide that grocery basket and offload some of that. That's why I appreciate Allison for sharing her personal story and bringing in the big guns to condition our minds to healthy and sustainable nourishment. What part of Allison's story did you relate to the most? Even if you have been there and are working your way to a more balanced and holistic lifestyle, share your journey for others to learn. Each one, teach one. I love it all, and so will someone else. Before I let you go, Allison, why don't you go ahead and remind people who you are, where they can find your resources, or reach out to you.
Yep, my name is Allison, and the company and the program that I work on that helps folks that might be struggling with overtraining or underfueling is called Ally. You can find resources, everything from starting to work with us to free tools to just get you started and exploring your own path, your own journey are available at theallymethod.com. I'm also on Instagram at Allison Yamamoto, my own name, and I would love to hear from you. DM me. I really love to chat with folks and meet you all and hear stories. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
I'll make sure to include all of Allison's resources and connections in the episode description, as well as on my website's resources page, movingwithmeaning.com. Make sure you guys subscribe to the show, Moving With Meaning, the podcast, and tap that alert bell so you know when these episodes drop. I'm on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and YouTube Music. Please share, like, repost, and follow. Tag someone. We are creating a community. Quick housekeeping before you go. Follow me on Instagram at movingwithmeaning82 and on my Pinterest at Author KB Clark. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. I do dabble in TikTok at Krystal B. Clark. My Etsy store has some handy dandy digital downloads. Lastly, run over to my YouTube channel and have a look or two. Links are in the episode. Alrighty, I'm Krystal on Moving With Meaning, the podcast, reminding you to take it one step at a time. All moves have meaning. Check y'all later.